How's it going, guys? This is John from Tombalek back with another video, and today I'm gonna be showing you guys how to build this simple tissue box using Dovetail Joinery. Okay, so as you can see, it's four-sided walls, four-sided box with the lid on top, and the lid is wedge fit, so which means there's no glue involved in this whole build. Okay, so basically the rabbet is cut in a very tight manner, so it just sort of wedges itself onto the box like that, but on its own it's very strong. And the idea is simply to put it on top of the box, so that's why we don't have any floorboard on this here. And you can make this into any shape that you want, a square, a rectangle box, doesn't really matter. So I'm using different thickness of material just to show you guys that you can build, you can do dovetail joinery even if you don't have the same thickness material. Okay. All right, so let's jump right into it. It's going to be really fun. It's supposed to be like a 1 to 2 day project. It's very simple, okay, and it's really fun also. All right, let's go. Okay, as the first crucial marking, what we need to do is to mark out which corner is going to be connected to which. So I've marked this corner, this side of the board, capital A, and the other side a smaller a, and so this is going to be connected to here. So I'm going to mark this small a, and then there's going to be a smaller b which connects to smaller b on the other side, and so on and so forth. You need to do that because especially if the thickness are not the same, because they need to correspond to each other, the joints. Okay, so right after we have done that, actually I'm not sure if you can see it. It says big A here, and then smaller a here, and on the other board you'll see smaller a, and then lowercase b over here. It's kind of hard to see because I'm using pencil on a walnut board. So after that, we mark out the thickness. Okay, to describe the thickness of the board, there's a couple ways to do this. One of which is to use a caliper, measure the caliper, the thickness of the board, and you transfer it onto the other board like a measuring gauge, marking gauge. But there's an easier way to do that, which is to use the thickness itself. So what you need to do is just bring the chisel flat on the surface, keep it really flat, and keep it flat on the table, and then just scribe a line like that. Of course, when you're doing this, you want to be careful of your finger. You don't want to push your finger, push your hand right into the edge of the blade. Do the same thing over here. Okay, so now you have scribed a really precise marking there at the edge. So if you want to do the same thing here, just bring it over like that. You're going to be doing some dovetailing, so the marking and measuring at the start is very important. So the more precise the drawings, the more precise your cuts are going to be later on. Okay, so now it's time to draw out the pins. I'm going to start with the pin boards. Okay, so make sure you're drawing on a pin board, of course. You can either start with a pin board or a tail board. It doesn't really matter, but it depends on individual preference, I guess. because there's still a debate on which one is better. Whichever one that you're more familiar with, just go with that. Okay, and of course you will need a dovetail template. I'm using a 1:7 ratio, and if you want to learn how to make one of these, you can check out Guanjun's video. I'll put a link in the video at the top. Okay, so since we're drawing the pins, we need to draw on the end grain. Okay, so we're going to start with a half pin on each side, about 5 millimeter on the narrow side. It doesn't really have to be super precise, because whichever drawing that you start out with is going to become the template for your next cut, for your next board. So I'm going to add 2 more pins right in the middle. Just going to eyeball right here. So I've actually drawn out 2 pins in the middle and 2 half pins on the corners, and I'm going to be removing these pieces, the tail pieces, and the pins are really small, and so the tails are going to look much wider, so there's a bit of that contrast going on, which is really nice. Okay, so once you're done with that, what you need to do is square the line down onto the sides on both sides. So just like that, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and the other pin board as well. Okay, so now I've drawn out both pin boards, as you can see. Okay, so now you can actually see a lot better. You see, like, I eyeball the placement of the pins, and they still look pretty damn close. So yeah. So long as you have them placed proportionally, it's completely fine. As you can see, the pins are small and the tails are going to be bigger, so these are going to be waist. Okay, so one thing that I want to cover before I move on to cutting is so when you are marking the pins, let's say the pins right there, make sure the narrower side of the pin is slightly wider than the smallest chisel that you have. Otherwise, you'll have trouble cutting that out later. Okay, so yeah, that's basically it. Just make sure the pins are not too small to a point where you don't really have the tool to cut it out. All right, so next part is sawing. Okay, so now it's time to saw off the material. Okay, so now I've clamped this board on the table, on the bench. Okay, so I'm going to be using this hacksaw with a very fine teeth, 18 teeth per inch. Okay, so when you're cutting, make sure you cut right next to the line, and make sure your cut line is on the waist side. Start slow. Start from the back corner, follow it down to the back, and make sure you cut a really nice straight line all the way across. Now I have a straight line all the way across. I'm just going to cut it down. And make sure you don't cut over the marking gauge line at the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to stick to all the corners on this side. And I'm done with all the corners going this way. So now I'm going to start cutting the other angle. all done. I'm just going to check the line on the other side, make sure they go all the way down to the marking gauge. Okay, that's it. So I'm going to continue cutting all the other pin boards, and then we'll move on to removing the waste. Alright, so now we're down to the part of removing the waste from the pin boards. So there's a couple of ways to do that, one of which is to use a chisel and chop it down, and the other way is to use a coping saw. I'm going to use a coping saw because when you chop down, it makes a really loud thud. And since I'm in the staircase, it has a lot of echo, and I'm receiving like noise complaint. So this is a quieter way of getting rid of the material. But we have a really comprehensive playlist on how to cut proper dovetails done by Robin and Gwenjin. So you should definitely check it out if you want to get more into the details of how to cut proper dovetails. But I'm just going to use this scroll saw. No, it's not scroll saw. Coping saw. Okay, so slide the blade down. So I'm just basically going to cut a curve down to the corner and back. So I'll show you how to get rid of the bulk of the material. Let it bite into the material. So make sure you start pulling the blade out and up so that it doesn't cut over the marking. Okay, so now I'm going to get rid of the other corner. Ow! To do that, I'm just going to reposition the board. So just remember, the more material you remove, the less chiseling you'll have to do. So just be cautious not to cut over the line, but at the same time, don't be too cautious to a point where, you know, using a coping saw becomes pointless. Okay. So now I'm done with this. We're gonna start chiseling. Okay, so now there's less material to chisel away from the board, which also means lesser work, which is great. Okay, so now we're going to chisel all the way down to the line that we have marked out, right? So just bring in the biggest chisel you have. So I'm going to be rotating between this 16mm and this 6mm chisel. I just realized the camera's in the way. Start from the end. So I'm going to slowly chisel my way back to the finish line. Make sure you hold the chisel straight down. Hit it hard. Move to the left or the right. One more time. So if there's too much material, just half it. Just cut half of it first before you move to the line. Okay, so now all of my cut are at the knife line, which is perfect. Okay. And then move over to the other side. Cut the material in half. So cutting it in half prevents the chisel from moving back into the material, into the board. So when you're chiseling or when you're chopping, make sure you only go down to about halfway, because if you go all the way to the other end, you might end up chipping over the edge. So we're just keep repeating the same process. This time around it should be all the way down. Okay, so most of the material is clean except for the middle. There's a little bit of a hill in the middle. You can probably see that. And we just need to pare it down to be completely flat. Just before you start paring, just make sure you remove as much of the material as you can. Okay, to pare, right, you need to bring the board back here. Okay, so now we're going to be paring this surface down. Okay, paring is basically cutting the surface flat. So to start paring, make sure you keep the chisel flat. It's actually easier if you start out with a smaller chisel. Keep the chisel flat with your thumb. Pressure down on the bevel and slowly push forward. And then the next cut is going to follow the first surface, the first flat surface that you just pare down. So paring, you also want to go to right about the middle, not all the way through. The same reason you don't want to have any tear out on the other side. So probably at this stage I can switch back to the big chisel. It covers more surface area. Just make sure your fingers are not on the other side like this here. Now I'm going to pare from the other side, and that should be it. So right now you don't really need to worry about the side of the pins. Just make sure you focus on the floor here. Make sure it's flat, make sure the corners are clean. So if there's a bit of a concave, it's completely fine because the joint will actually be putting it flat, but you don't want to have any convex surface here. Okay, make sure everything is flat. Once it's flat, you're basically done. Now you can move on to the next joint. Okay, so I'm going to finish up cutting out all the waste, and then we'll move on to checking all the straightness of the pins before we get started on the tailboards. Alright, so now I've finished cutting all the pins out. As you can see, they're all very clean. Just make sure the floors are flat and it's square to the shoulders. Okay. And you don't really need to work too much on the pins. The only thing that you need to take note is just to make sure they are straight and square. So you don't want to have them taper, otherwise there's definitely going to be a joint. There's definitely going to be a problem with the fitting later on. Okay, so once you're at this stage, we're going to copy the shape of these pins onto the tailboards.